In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds.
Until you've been on the mall, you can't experience that this vast open space represents we the people, the foundation of the Constitution. It starts with us, and that's what open space is, which is why public open space is so important, so valuable, and so meaningful.
If you don't represent people in a symbolic space like the National Mall, they will not feel that they belong to this nation, nor will they even go to the mall.
We've had anti-war demonstrations during the 1960s and 70s, going up and down the mall, from the Washington Monument down to the Lincoln Memorial. The 4th of July fireworks, which have been taking place for many, many years. The Cherry Blossom Festival, when people come and their musical performances. It's everything from inaugurations to protest marches to celebrations. It really is the First Amendment place.
Peter Linfont imagined a capital city built around an extraordinary idea. As with the Republic itself, he envisioned the people at its center, with public space at its heart. A century later, James Macmillan inherited that unfinished vision and expanded it, creating a civic stage for generations he could never know. Marian Anderson was among the first to reveal what that stage could become. Her presence challenged a nation to reconsider who belonged. Together, she and the gathered public offered a glimpse of what that promise could look like. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. stands on the same stage before an even larger public. The question is no longer who belongs. The question is, what are we going to do about it?
But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice.
This is the Sidewalk Ballet. Generation after generation, we have returned to this place. We have come to celebrate victories, to mourn unimaginable loss, to demand justice, to honor sacrifice, to grieve together, to rejoice together. We have marched, we have sung, we have prayed, we have protested, we have remembered, and we have imagined. On these lawns, Americans have welcomed home astronauts and celebrated victory. We have mourned presidents, commemorated wars, quilted the names of our deceased loved ones, demanded civil rights, women's rights, workers' rights, gay rights, gathered for peace, for equality, and to affirm what was established 250 years ago: no kings. Some arrived with signs, some with hats, some with songs, some with candles, some with children on their shoulders, some with hope, and some with heartbreak. But generation after generation, we came.
So the Lincoln Memorial has truly become itself a stage for American democracy and civil rights. But the open space all around the Washington Monument, because American history was continuing. We had just come out of the Civil War just a few decades before. And it was just a traumatic event and threatened the entire nation unity. And so Lincoln was still very, very, very important to the American story. And the Macmillan Commission recognized that, not only with the Lincoln Memorial, but with the Memorial Bridge connecting the Lincoln Memorial to Arlington Cemetery. The house on Arlington House, had been the home of Robert E. Lee. So they took upon themselves not just a design, but a symbolic connection with the founding of the country, the preserving of the country, and the reunification of the country. They knew that the American story hadn't ended with George Washington, and they were using L'Enfant's vision to now extend it.
James Macmillan's plan was never intended to be a monument to itself. Like the republic it served, the National Mall would continue to evolve. Each generation inherited the landscape, adding new events, new museums, new chapters to the American story. As the national conversation evolved, so did the National Mall. Then a new war memorial changed not only who we remembered, but how all of us are reflected in both the sacrifices and the responsibility of a democracy. Not a statue to a president, not an equestrian monument to a general, a simple wall bearing the names of more than 58,000 Americans.
It really started with the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Congress wanted to authorize the memorial, and it was eventually built in 1982, and then the floodgates opened. Once you gave a portion of the landscape around the Lincoln Memorial, then the Korean veterans, and then ultimately the World War II Memorial. The World War II Memorial, broke up what used to be a great passageway between the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial. You can't walk through it anymore. You have to walk around it. The Park Service did a mall plan in 2010. They finished it, and it starts by saying the mall is a completed work of civic art. Now, what do you do when you've got a completed? You maintain it. So you fix the grass, you fix the light, you fix the walkways, but you're not showing the way to the future. And you're not anticipating climate issues. You're not anticipating your grandchildren and what they might want on the mall in Washington. Congress was actually well-intentioned. What was happening is they realized with the big controversy over the World War II Memorial that we were losing more than we were gaining in many respects. So they declared the mall a completed work of civic art and put in a moratorium, and they immediately made exceptions to the moratorium. So clearly it's not a completed work of civic art. In addition to the war memorials, we've been adding museums that tell totally kind of ignored chapters in American history, including the Museum of the Native American, or the American Indian, as it's called, or the African American Museum of History and Culture. I mean, these are stories that may have been told in tiny snippets in our museums on the mall. But when people come to the mall and you've got sixth grade classes and 12th grade classes and families coming, they were getting only a partial story. Now they get a much fuller story, and we're filling that gap with monuments to those. Now, two others that have been approved by Congress for the mall are Latino American and women's history. Now, these two seem to be, on a hold at the moment, but you can see that the desire is there, both by the citizenry and even by Congress, to fill out more of the American story as we continue to evolve in new ways. But also there have been restrictions now in more recent years, and this has been also very troubling to me, to us. That is that once the Park Service had put in the new grass and a sprinkler system, the mall looks beautiful, but they've been restricting public uses more and more. So the National Book Festival, which used to take place every couple of years, the Solar Decathlon, sponsored by the Department of Energy, where college students would build totally solar-dependent houses. I mean, a wonderful expression of ingenuity, of engineering, of American creativity. These kinds of things that we believe the mall was intended for, and the mall should adapt itself to. Instead, they're being pushed away.
Basically, public spaces, when people come together and appropriate and take a space and make it their own and use it for the strategies and or whatever they want to do, be it, playing ball again or having a concert or a picnic or political organizing. In other words, just having a piece of ground that is open, that you can walk into, it doesn't have fences, may indeed be a public space in a kind of classical sense. But if nobody is there and activating it and people aren't making it public, I'm not sure that it's public in the truest sense of the word. And I think when we think about public spaces, we think about spaces that people care about and are taking responsibility for, are involved in, activating. What's changing public space in cities today? When I'm interviewed, I think it's the privatization of them. We have, again, huge amount of research that demonstrates over and over and over again that privately owned public spaces often have no one in them, often have dogs or policemen, often have what we've been calling hostile architecture. Often they're closed. I don't know, out of the 575 pops that we now have that started in the 1960s. In fact, most of those public parks are not accessible, not friendly, not a place of belonging, and all of them make it illegal to protest. You can't skateboard, you can't eat, you can't play music, you can't ride a bike, can't roller skate. Kids see that and they know they're not meant to be there. And same with malls. Malls for older people in the summer, the air conditioning, and in the winter, the heating, really popular for walking. But you can't protest there because essentially it's still private. There are private guards who will throw you out. They're private spaces that they let the public in. The rule structure in Herald Square, the sitting wall that says no sitting. I mean, I think you need a mix of people. It is possible for groups of people to privatize spaces just to their own appropriation. And I've always wondered, are we allowing some people to appropriate and not others? I'm not always sure that it will ever work to have outside aid. I mean, I know there's policing and surveillance. I write about that just as much as I write about public space. But if we're trying to talk about truly democratic space, we really need to be thinking of models where people begin to work it out themselves and find their own strategies of managing. I mean, I think that the best public spaces have a lot of space, have places for everybody to do what they need to do.
Traditionally, when we talk about the commons, we talk about an exhaustible shared resource. And I think in the context of climate change, we think about air, we think about the earth, we think about water as a resource. And, there's a famous parable, let's say, The Tragedy of the Commons, written by Garrett Hardin, that basically presupposes that if people are left to their own devices, they'll exhaust, exhaustible resources because they're selfish actors and they'll take what they want. And then Eleanor Ostrom, whose work I followed closely and modeled some of my own work on, kind of flipped that and just said, well, people can collectively manage shared resources, including water and fisheries, et cetera. And I kind of brought that idea along with my colleagues and co-authors into the urban environment to say that, land, for instance, or parks in particular urban communities are also shared resources. But the commons is a collective shared resource, basically, at its simplest, under a level of understanding. If you think about kinds of property or goods, there's private property, our houses, the things that we have full title to. And then there's public property, stuff that the state or the city owns. You think about City Hall, you think about, natural resources, the Grand Canyon, that's, held in trust and managed by the government. And the commons is said to be something kind of in between those, which are typically in the tragedy of the commons. It's space that is uncaptured, unowned, it's ungoverned, and hence it can be overused and exhaustible because there's nothing stopping people just from taking it. If you think about natural resources that exist that's given to us by, Mother Earth, let's say, no one owns the air, no one owns the oceans. That's a kind of typical commons. I think when you bring that into the urban environment, it gets more complicated because most resources in the urban environment are owned, either publicly or privately. But the idea of invoking the commons in the urban environment is not to describe precisely the character of the resource, it's public, private, or commons, but it's the idea that, well, it's a normative, not descriptive claim. This should be space that is shared and open to all. And we need a governance structure that makes sure it remains open and accessible. And that could be a mixed public-private, it could be a community governance, but so that's the way that we've used it here, because I think the nature of resources is more complicated in a built environment than it is, let's say, in the natural world.
Very early writings of what is public are quite large, liberal, that any space where people gather should be considered public. And so there have been a number of lawsuits, especially in New Jersey, trying to argue that a mall people should be allowed to protest, or politicians should speak, or, I mean, it's not without pushback. And I wonder if over time that'll ever change, especially because almost all of our new space is going to be private. By the way, on the National Mall, I happen to feel, in fact, have a huge amount of evidence. I mean, really the most evidence I have of anything else, many, many, many years, that if you don't represent people in a symbolic space like the National Mall, they will not feel that they belong to this nation, nor will they even go to the mall. I mean, Independence National Historical Park is a great example of a white colonial space at I think it's now 25 years ago, I did a study of, and I was to talk to people in all the neighborhoods in Philly, right? And African Americans is a huge park. It isn't just the Liberty Bell and the Independence Hall. This is a big park that could be used. It's a beautiful park in downtown Philadelphia. And they never went there. And you ask them why. And they go, the only thing black about the area is the ink on the page, or that kind of statement, that there's just no representation. And indeed, I don't know if you know this, but the first African American burying ground in the United States is in that park. It's Washington Square. And it was never even interpreted as, there was not even a sign that would say, first African American burying ground. It has this long history. I mean, that kind of, I'm very I feel pretty strongly, as you could tell probably, about historical erasure. So whether they think they have room on that mall or they don't think they have room on the mall, they need to make room on that mall so that the diverse peoples who live here, I mean, the Vietnamese neighborhood in Philly that I interviewed wanted the Liberty Bell. They said, I don't know why you just interpret it. It's a colonial struggle. We all were involved in colonial struggles. We all know what liberty looks like. They can identify with the Liberty Bell. Why not interpret it as a struggle of all peoples for liberty? I mean, rather than, again, interpreting things in this narrow way. So I wanted to say something. I feel that representation of different people's struggles is very important to a sense of belonging to the nation, or just as much as belonging to a public space or a city or a country.
The story of We the People is the story of who belongs, not just on the National Mall, but in every generation. The National Mall is a symbol. It points beyond itself to the everyday places where democracy is lived. The library, the neighborhood park, the corner cafe, the sidewalk, the town square. The places where we practice being neighbors, where differences become conversations instead of headlines. Where day after day, democracy stops being an idea and becomes a practice.
None of the movements that I know of that have expanded democracy and who gets to take part have started at the top. They've all started locally in some way and moved their way up.
What I've realized is that third places really provide a solution to the major problems we face, the things we need cures for, essentially loneliness, climate change, and political polarization.
Public joy is not an emotion or an idea. It is a generative civic condition. It is a condition that asks what kinds of systems, spaces, policies, and social attitudes would make our collective joy, belonging, and thriving not possible, but inevitable.
Over the past year on Sidewalk Ballet, we've wandered through cities. On buses and in libraries, cafes and parks, we've talked about joy and connection, belonging, public art and public life. Different voices, different experiences, different cities. But together, they begin to sound like the same invitation.
How do we figure out what is best for the greater good? And is that what we're still aiming for? And how do we negotiate that and acknowledge that part of equity is saying, maybe there aren't any bright line rules other than care about individuals, listen to individuals, and be responsive in that moment.
You know, you can go into a neighborhood and the neighborhood will have the answers to whatever the problems or the questions are of the place. But there'll be hundreds of them. And it will get people along a journey where they do become a consensus emerges amongst themselves about what they want. And creative means and creative artistic questioning is a really great way to do that.
Public space matters to everybody who enters it, regardless of your socioeconomic status, regardless of your position in life. And so for me, people's experience as they're walking their dog or they're walking to work or they're leaving their apartment to go to a restaurant around the corner, that matters to me a lot.
The invitation is not simply to share a place, it's to become neighbors. And every generation has been challenged to imagine who their neighbors can be.
When you see different images, different colors, different symbols, all of those things, when you are as an immigrant, for example, when I'm walking in the street and I suddenly see something written in Farsi, it takes me, because belonging is just not the people, it is the space, it is the smell, it is the visual images that you see around you. Are we really creating a space of belonging for the folks that we want to welcome them? I think that's the constant question and quest for all of us.
At places like Compton's Cafeteria, which used to be at the corner of Turk and Taylor Streets in the Tenderloin, it was a racially mixed and integrated space. And that what some of the trans women I've talked to who were there, they would say, well, the white girls would be with the white girls and the brown girls would be with the brown girls and the Asian girls would be with the Asian girls and the black girls would be with the black girls. But when the police came in, we were all trans. Sometimes there's differences within a community, but that in the face of external oppression, people know what they're banding together as.
By building those places, and we know that through history, having those spaces, whether it's the civil rights history, where people were, there were churches, there were, the blacks only places, where there were either hotels or restaurants where people would gather to build what became the civil rights movement, right? And so, but it's also just the kind of places where people go to build community so that they feel like their neighborhood is worth living in. Straight up.
But it's the learning how to be together with difference. It's the learning how to be together in a space, and that there are all kinds of unwritten rules and regulations that begin to develop among a group of people that characterize that space.
L'Enfant gave us public space in a great city, and the framers gave us the architecture of a democracy. The rest has always belonged to the public. Great cities are never finished. Neither are great democracies. Each generation inherits a foundation and leaves behind a different story.
The third century idea is to build on what the mall has become and its fulfillment of the original vision of 1791, the L'Enfant Plan, and the U.S. Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, the First Amendment, and so on. So I've been teaching mall history since the 1990s, and I've helped found a nonprofit, the National Mall Coalition, in 2000. And we are architects and planners and historians and concerned citizens who realize that the National Mall is under the jurisdiction of at least 8 government agencies. And when there's a controversy, you start to realize what the problem is. Nobody agrees on what the mall is, where the mall is, what its purpose is. And so we founded this nonprofit to try to represent the public interest, in particular, the purpose of the open space, the use of the open space, and what we call the stage for American democracy. We realized there was no plan. And so for really 25 years, we've been saying we need a third century mall plan, a third century mall plan that recognizes that contrary to what Congress said, the mall is not a completed work of civic art. We keep adding new museums, new memorials, new monuments, and we don't have a logical way to locate them. So what happens? They fill the open space. So we could expand the mall boundaries. We've got plenty of public land that is underutilized, especially along the river. We could create special venues where these things could happen against the backdrop of the Capitol and the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial. We can do it, but we need a plan. We need a vision that updates the Macmillan Commission plan.
I mean, there are really successful spaces, but you need enough room. You need to accommodate difference. You need to accept that behavioral norms will not always be the same. You have to allow for political activity and organizing. It needs to be not dominated particularly by any one group. You need that mix. It makes for it symbolically and really is a way of us feeling safe together. I mean, that's my image, and we don't always have that much space, but it can be done in much smaller spaces, but it has to be done thoughtfully. And I think activation is really important. You know, we've been closing streets since COVID in New York, and that's been a great program. In general, for the health of the neighborhood, people do sit in their chairs and get to come outside and know each other. And all that activation, I mean, to think that people are going to come together is what I was trying to just say to you. Just have contact like in nothingness. That's not the case. You need activation. You need to create this, what I call public culture. And I think management needs to be light-handed. I think we have to, you know, everybody keeps saying how to manage. I think we have to think about how to bring people together in safe ways.
So we've got the public land. We could make use of it. We could expand the American story. And we can plan to continue to expand it as we evolve, because we don't know what the future holds. And I think it's really kind of rude of us to assume that history ended with us and that future generations don't get their place.
This month, we celebrated democracy. Tomorrow morning, someone will unlock a library. Someone will sweep a sidewalk. Someone will pull up another chair. Someone will bring soup to a neighbor. Someone will stand up for someone they've never met. And we will all get another chance to become we the people.
We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. This sweltering summit of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until that is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. Those who hoped that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual.
This has been Sidewalk Ballet, Democracy of Public Space. Sidewalk Ballet is a production of Big Creative Consulting. This documentary was made possible by the generosity of 3 remarkable scholars. My sincere thanks to distinguished Professor Seth Lowe, Professor of Psychology, Anthropology, Earth and Environmental Sciences, Women's and Gender Studies, and author of Why Public Space Matters. To Judy Scott Feldman, founder and chair of the National Mall Coalition, and a lifelong advocate for preserving the National Mall as America's civic front yard. And to Sheila Foster, professor of climate at Columbia University and co-author of Co-Cities, whose work continues to challenge us to imagine how we share our cities and our future. My extended conversations with each of them are available at sidewalkballet.com. This story is also informed by and woven together with the voices of so many past guests from the Sidewalk Ballet. My thanks to Evan Weissman, Karen Christensen, Jay Pitter, Tamika Butler, Cara Courage, Kathleen Rawson, Leva Zand, Susan Stryker, and Majora Carter, whose ideas became the chorus for this conversation. Our theme music and original music for the Sidewalk Ballet composed by the Peacoat Project. Audio engineering and mastering by Ryan Musante. And finally, my deepest thanks to my wife, Abra, whose encouragement, thoughtful feedback, and unwavering belief have shaped not only this episode, but every step of this journey. If this conversation has meant something to you and you'd like to help support future episodes of the Sidewalk Ballet, you'll find links in the show notes. Thanks for joining me on this special block of the Sidewalk Ballet. I'm Chip. I'll see you downtown.